10 years ago, Gibraltar delivered one of the clearest Remain votes anywhere in the Brexit referendum. 96% of voters here chose to stay in the European Union. The argument at the time was clear. Gibraltar's geography made Brexit uniquely risky. The border, the movement of workers, access to Spain, and the wider relationship with Europe were all at stake. Gibraltar campaigned hard against leaving, with the Stronger In campaign warning of uncertainty and disruption. Politicians and activists described it as an existential threat for Gibraltar and feared the possibility of Spain turning the screws at the border and economically. But a decade later, the picture is a little more complicated. After years of negotiations, cliff edges and political uncertainty, a UK-EU treaty now promises a more fluid frontier and a new relationship with Schengen arrangements. So what does that mean for the judgment Gibraltar made in 2016? Was the Remain campaign proved right by the years of uncertainty, or has the final outcome changed the way history looks? Tonight, Viewpoint asks, if Gibraltar knew then what it knows now, would it still have voted Remain? It seems like such a long time ago, doesn't it? Well, joining us tonight are four people who were there on the ground during the first year and have been there since. To my immediate right, Gemma Arias-Vasquez, who was the leader of the Stronger In campaign, and now you were a minister for a bunch of stuff and possibly future chief minister as well. And to my far right, Aaron Santos, who was 18 at the time, was a student. Actually, you weren't a student yet. You were about to leave for university, but you were part of the Stronger In campaign. That's right. And now you're working with Gemma in her office. And to my left, I have Michael Jamas, the Attorney General, who has been instrumental throughout the last 10 years, and Elliot Phillips, who shortly after the Brexit vote became the parliamentary leader of the opposition and is back, I believe, in the fold of the GSD executive now.
We say back. I was always part of the executive.
Oh, I see.
It's just a re-election.
Okay.
I know the press have sort of taken the bait, but it's I'm grateful for the opportunity to come and speak again.
Okay. Well, let's take it back to 2016, the weeks before the vote. Gemma, it was a rather difficult few months just ahead of the vote, wasn't it?
It was a very intense period. And our message at the time was that every vote counted. We were very conscious that the vote was in June, and we were very conscious that we needed to get as many people out as humanly possible. Subsequently, there is a book called Unleashing Demons, which is by Craig Oliver, one of the aides at the time of David Cameron, that confirms that at the time the UK government thought that the vote could be as close as 32,000 people. 32,000 people could swing that vote, so Gibraltar would have played a very, very strong part in that. So it was an extremely intense 2 months where the message was, everybody please come out and vote. This is very important for Gibraltar's future.
And Aaron, can I have your recollections at the time? You were only 18. It must have been quite formative for you.
Yeah, I remember very well. Obviously, first of all, it's crazy that 10 years has passed since the referendum. It feels like yesterday. I'd actually just been 18. This was the first time I'd ever voted. And I remember thinking, gosh, if Sir Peter Caruana, who was the chief minister that I'd grown up with, Fabian Picardo, who was the chief minister at the time and was chief minister for the entire time I was at Bayside School, Sir Joe Bolsano, who was the chief minister that my parents grew up with, and Adolfo Canepa, who I'd read about and I'd heard about from the time with Sir Joshua, if they were all saying the same thing, this must be a very important moment for Gibraltar. So I remember having just turned 18 thinking, I must get involved in this. This seems very important, and I did everything I could to try and bring people out to vote and vote Remain.
Elliot, you were in the opposition as an MP at the time, and very shortly after you became the parliamentary leader of the opposition. So Tell us what you inherited at that moment, those particular moments shortly after the referendum.
Yeah, look, it was probably one of the most important times in my political lifetime that I had. I think it presented itself as, for us, I think, a significant challenge. We wanted to be the poster boy for the Remain campaign. It was quite clear that that's what we were going to become, that the vast majority of the population would vote Remain. And I think one of the things that was going through my mind, is, and Gemma alluded to it, is that it was so important for all of us to be united on the question of Remain, rather than Leave, of course, and to go out there and campaign for that vote. So all of us on each side of the House were virulently campaigning for Remain. And I think it was just, whilst it was a challenge in terms of the organisation, I think it was a representation of Gibraltar as a community and our close relationship and our familiar relationship with people across the border that shone through. And I'm very, we'll go on to talk about why it was so vast in terms of the numbers that voted for Remain. But I hold the firm belief it's because actually our relationship with Europe and our desires and our wants are very, very different from the desires and needs and wants of the people of the United Kingdom, for instance, in terms of the British people. So all of us, I think, felt that the overriding result would be in favour of Remain.
Michael, this was a particularly poignant time for you because you'd spent your entire career as an EU lawyer. You had been at the forefront of the enfranchisement campaign to get Gibraltar into the European Parliament, to get Gibraltarians the right to vote in the European elections, and then all of a sudden, just overnight, it all went up in smoke.
Indeed, Jonathan. It was existentialist for Gibraltar as a whole, and it was existentialist for me personally. As you've said, my entire career as it was built around EU law. I went to university to study law with French, with a year in Strasbourg. I did a master's at King's College specialising in European law. I did my pupillage 6 months in Brussels and 6 months with the top EU law set in London. I then moved to Paris, got qualified as an avocat in the Paris bar. I practiced EU law for 5 years there until I got a call from Sir Peter in 1997 telling me that he intended to open a representative office in Brussels, and he asked me whether I wanted to do that, which obviously I did. Spent a good 10 years in Brussels just doing Gibraltar and EU law, and since then it's been the lion's share of my life. So all of a sudden I find myself with the area of law I had specialised in, everything I had done in my professional life sort of being removed from me, which was a very weird sensation.
What happened, in your minds? What happened when that vote was declared? I mean, it started off so well, didn't it? We declared our result in Gibraltar, everyone was jubilant, everyone was perhaps a little bit apprehensive, but then over the course of the night, it just all went sour.
Yeah. I think, it's been said a lot, it's been said since, it was a vote not only about the EU, but people were unhappy with the state of affairs. People were reacting to a whole bunch of issues that there were in the UK. And as a result, the Brexit campaign was very successful because it did play a lot on those emotions of things that were going wrong in society. And not necessarily addressed. But that was the case in the UK. In Gibraltar, there was very different sentiment. In Gibraltar, the sentiment was one where we were all acutely aware of the 15,000 cross-frontier workers that we have coming into Gibraltar every day. We were all acutely aware of the importance of the EU in our relationships, our cross-border relationships. So to a certain extent, the relationship was safeguarded by the EU, who came over occasionally. We've had our issues. We know that we had our issues. But the feeling was that if we had our issues whilst we were in the EU, what was it going to be like if we were no longer in the EU? Which, to a certain extent, we saw the morning after the referendum, what the Foreign Secretary of Spain at the time said. He said that that was the best opportunity that Spain would have. So I think Gibraltar was acutely aware of what it could mean, which is why we got the result that we did at the time. We were the only place that had a frontier, and that meant that the effect to us would be immediate and direct, whereas in the UK, the immediacy was not quite there. So I think all of that played into the different results that we got here and in the UK.
Was that the main fear that we had? Was that Spain?
I think so, and I think being a small territory, it always feels good belonging to a bigger family. I think our experience of EU membership, as Gemma has just said, was by and large a good one. We always felt the European Commission could do more about the frontier queues, but we had a generally good experience with it. We had good results in the courts. We got the vote through litigation in the European court.
We had UK political parties for the first time coming to campaign in Gibraltar.
Absolutely. We also had the regional selectivity. One forgets these things now, but for many, many years we were plagued with this threat, which was quite a big threat on Gibraltar, and got through that after 10 years of litigation and defeated that. So by and large, it was a good feeling of belonging to this international organization, and I think we felt secure, and it provided us with a number of reassurances with Spain as well, which made us feel very comfortable. And I think because of our ancestry, perhaps we inherently feel very European in Gibraltar, so
Yes,
it made sense to belong to.
Michael's absolutely right. It's about, our geography connects us to continental Europe. We cannot forget that. A lot of us have relationships with people in Spain, families. And also the sense is that we didn't have the same complaints that the British people had insofar as sovereignty, European courts, immigration particularly. I think also we often forget actually, Michael has EU law running through his veins, as he's clearly set out, and Gemma and I have never known anything else but Europe and that connection with Europe. And also it's an unusual thing because clearly we're very close to Britain, and the relationship with Britain, in my view, has got a lot stronger than it has been in the past. And we're a British overseas territory. We have that relationship with Britain, but we also feel European. I certainly do anyway. So it's an unusual mix of wanting to remain British for the protection that the British can offer in difficult times with Spain, but also, we've grown up with Spain. We've grown up with the European. We've grown up with travel, with education in terms of Erasmus and systems like that. But so in a sense, it's a natural choice to not want to depart the European Union. And we don't that's why I said, we don't have the same desires and wants as the people of the United Kingdom. We are different and we should celebrate that. And I think we came out, 96% of us, saying that. And
it's interesting that you mentioned that a lot of us do feel European because that's what we've grown up with. But perhaps, I'll ask Aaron this. You have perhaps, since the age of 18, grown up not being European. So does that change the identity?
I remember at the time of the referendum, I think it's fair to say that my main concern, and I think the main concern of most Gibraltarians, was the border, yeah? But it wasn't just about the border. I remember my grandparents talking to me about the closed frontier generation and how it would be okay if Spain was, became very difficult in a very hard border situation if we voted leave. And I remember, and they said, look, we'll survive. And I remember having a conversation with them at the time and saying, look, but I don't want to just survive. I want to thrive. Yeah. And I remember believing strongly.
For example, the evacuation generation, the closed border generation, it was all about survival.
It was survival.
We'd grown up with much more than that.
Exactly. And I had grown up with much more than that. And so I didn't want to lose that. And I felt that the only way we could ensure that we thrived, I felt as a people, was by having the protection of the European Union. So, and with that, the political stability that provided, the economic prosperity that it provided with free movement of services and of people, etc. So, I wanted to protect all those things, and that's why I felt so strongly that we should remain.
It was, as Michael has said. So Michael lived in Bruges. He studied in France. He worked in France. My law firm in London sent me to a law firm in Madrid. I worked in Madrid, no issues whatsoever. It's quite sad that was lost. And I remember that as Aaron has said, a lot of it was about the border, about our relationship with Spain, but there was a part of me that felt that that had been lost to future generations, and it was extremely sad that a future generation wouldn't have the same opportunities that I had at the time.
I want to put this question to you all, and it's an open-ended question because, of course, everything is clearer in hindsight, especially 10 years later, but we campaigned mostly in Gibraltar to get that solid block of 32,000 votes, which we've established could have swung the vote. Should we perhaps have campaigned more in the UK? Would we have got perhaps sensitive ears listening to us, especially amongst the more conservative branches of the UK, who would have said, you know, if we vote leave, Gibraltar might be at risk?
So I don't think it was necessarily possible because we campaigned in our jurisdiction. We were plugged into the UK campaign at the time, but interestingly, what the UK did is that they did play on Gibraltar. So on the day that David Cameron was meant to come to Gibraltar, on that day, the view that was presented was that they wanted to show this unified rally, this unified bloc of people who wanted to remain in the EU. And they knew, they were very, very conscious that Gibraltar would be the place where they could get that. We knew that that when David Cameron came, there was a very strong sentiment of Gibraltar to be pro-EU. So whereas we couldn't campaign in the UK, we could have a voice as to what we thought, and the Stronger In campaign here did have some thoughts as to how the UK campaign was going. We were plugged in, but they were a much larger entity than we were. But they were acutely conscious, and we made them acutely conscious of the pro-Remain sentiment in Gibraltar, and how, in fact, we could highlight to the UK population how essential it was for us and bring that to light in a very positive way.
It's interesting you say that, because the night before the vote, I remember drafting, as we all do, in this social media crazy world that we live in, I drafted a post which was directed at friends and family in the UK, primarily, to tell them more about Gibraltar and what we will face if the decision goes against us. And it was a very popular post, and so I looked at all the statistics around, you know, the information they give you on posts, and it was very popular. A lot of people engaged in the issue. And I thought, well, at the time I thought, well, if we did more of this, would this help us do that? And I think Gemma's right that our jurisdiction is to sort of campaign here. But there was nothing stopping anyone doing that or having a sort of indiscreet, informal campaign in the United Kingdom to garner support for Gibraltar. But I think sometimes when we're here, we forget, actually, some of the significant issues that are going on in the United Kingdom, particularly on immigration. And people will look at Gibraltar, population of 38,000 people, and think, well, fine, that's Gibraltar. It's unknown to me. It's somewhere else. It's a British overseas territory. It's an offshore jurisdiction, and we all get labelled the same. And it's difficult because you're fighting against a view of Gibraltar as well. And while some people will wave the flag, and we wave it quite well, of course, and Gibraltar was the poster boy for Remain, as I've said, I think it's difficult to campaign in a country where, as I've said before, that the views of that population are very different to us.
I agree.
Very difficult.
I agree entirely with that. I don't think if we had done more, not that I think we should have done more, and we had to focus on Gib as we did, but it would not have swayed the vote in the UK. The British society was far too polarised on this issue. It was a fundamental debate, the one which the Conservative Party had resisted for decades, and it had been plaguing their own internal politics and the politics in the UK. I mean, it was a very intense UK issue. Yep. And I honestly, however much support we have in the UK, and we do, I honestly don't think that having done more in the UK would have had any impact on the vote.
Interestingly, we were in the office. I've seen the shots as they arise. We were in that Stronger In office day in, day out. And we'd be up and down Main Street, we'd be talking to people, and we'd be talking to tourists. And we'd be talking to a lot of UK tourists, and we'd also engage with them, and we tried to express our views and what it meant to Gibraltar. And at the time, I had a very, very strong team around me. There was a lot of people with a very strong sentiment, obviously, in order for them to join the campaign. And we could not persuade visitors to Gibraltar of the importance of remaining in the EU. Whatever we'd say to them, they were so entrenched in their views that there was no persuading them otherwise. So I think that the views expressed are right. However fundamental this was to us, the views in the UK were so entrenched that it possibly would not have made very much difference.
I agree with the rest of the panel. I think the best way for us to have campaigned in the UK was the approach that we took of bringing the UK Prime Minister over to Gibraltar. It was just extremely unfortunate that for very sad circumstances that I'm sure we'll come on to, for very sad circumstances, the rally that we had planned was unable to proceed. But I think that was the best approach that we took to sort of market Gibraltar in the UK, bringing the UK Prime Minister over to Gibraltar to show what support and how important an issue this was for Gibraltar.
Something which, to my recollection, has not happened since, a Prime Minister in Gibraltar.
It was the first time a serving Prime Minister came to Gibraltar.
Wilson.
No, but a serving Prime Minister.
Oh, I see.
It was the first time, apparently, that a serving Prime Minister came to Gibraltar. So, I mean...
I think as well, actually, it's an interesting thing, but I think it really... I've been thinking about that a lot recently, that this issue put a spotlight, really, on the relationship between Britain, Gibraltar, and the EU and Gibraltar in a way. And I think that the opportunity we always had with this was to reset our relationship not only with the European Union, but also the United Kingdom. And actually, it makes you confront some very big questions about, because the positions with Gibraltar and Britain were so different in respect to the approach to the referendum, that it puts a big spotlight, in my view, on, where do we want to go in our future, and what there are the constitutional constraints, and our constitutional settlement relationship with the United Kingdom is such that that debate often is internalised between constitutional lawyers and other people. But really, I think it was, in a way, a bit of a miss where we've avoided maybe tackling some real issues about Gibraltar, our status as a people, what we want to do in the future, where we want to go in the future. Because Britain was so far off what we wanted insofar as our relationship with Europe. So I think it was a fundamental time in history where there was actually an opportunity for us to say, we are Gibraltarian, this is our route home, and this is the relationship that we want. It's an unusual one, right?
I think to a large extent, Elliot, we have done that with the treaty. So we are not we're excluded from the trade and cooperation agreement between the UK and the EU, and then we spend 5 years negotiating a bespoke agreement for Gibraltar. This already sets us apart from the UK quite a lot. It also shows a path which is towards Europe and in Europe, which is very different to that of the UK. In fact, we've joined, for example, this Schengen-like relationship with the EU, which was anathema to the UK even during the times of membership. I'm sure we'll come.
Well, I wanted to ask you, just to establish the timeline, the very first, I wanted to ask you specifically about this, the very first moments where because you've been part of the inner circle all along, and following the Brexit vote, that first meeting where you sat down, I imagine, with the Chief Minister and the Cabinet, and established a battle plan,
well.
What was those first words
on the first day
that were mentioned?
I don't think there was the energy for battle plans that day. I mean, it was like having experienced some sort of abstract death. I mean, it was a very weird, somber feeling. I remember walking into the Chief Minister's office first thing in the morning, and we sat there and basically says, "Oh, what's going to happen now?" We certainly weren't expecting that result. So it starts off like that, but obviously, as the days go by, we get together and we put in place a strategy, or we start to think of the strategy that has taken us to where we are today. So I mean, I've just jotted down some notes because a lot.
Well, the first thing I can see there on your notes is the withdrawal agreement, which
Exactly.
was the very first step.
So we start.
That's the first thing you had to negotiate, which Gibraltar was not included.
Exactly. So I've divided up the 10 years into 4 general phases. So first of all, we react to the vote. We political turmoil in the UK. David Cameron resigns, Theresa May takes over. They take quite a while to trigger the Article 50 letter. You may recall all those months when we didn't know what was happening in the UK. In Spain, we start off with Margallo as Foreign Secretary and his nauseous statement that the flag, the Spanish flag, would be
think about it now, it really did look grim, didn't it?
the Spanish flag over the rock within 5 years. He's replaced by Alfonso Dastis in November 2016, and Dastis is a less hostile interlocutor.
He's a career diplomat, someone
exactly,
who's
much more amenable. And indeed, it's with the Pepe government of Rajoy that we start laying the basis for what was going to come. What we did here in GIB, in the government, is we were sent so-called heat maps by the Foreign Office. So these were templates that the UK government were using on a sector-by-sector basis to assess the impact that withdrawal from the EU was going to have on the UK economy. So we were sent these templates and we sat down to do it. But it became very obvious to us straight away that instead of doing a sector-by-sector approach, what we needed was a core heat map on the impact of Brexit on the border. And that became the main piece of work we did. We completed that in October of 2016. And having consulted, having looked at it, having spoken to economists, and what we all sort of knew, all of a sudden we had empirical evidence of the damage that would be caused to our socio-economic model if we didn't do something with the border. When one look at, in hindsight, all the years of EU membership, I think we became too dependent on that border. That little stretch of corridors was the basis for our entire socio-economic model. And it became very clear to us from then that if one thing we had to achieve, it was to secure a deal that would ensure some sort of continued border fluidity in the mess that we find ourselves. Before getting there, though, we had to negotiate our inclusion in the withdrawal agreement, which was not easy. You may recall I had forgotten about the guidelines that the European Council published in April 2017, and clause 24, which said after the UK leaves the Union, no agreement between the EU and the UK may apply to the territory of Gibraltar without the agreement between the Kingdom of Spain and the United Kingdom.
I remember this triggered a ministerial statement by the Chief Minister.
Precisely. So that set the tone really for what was coming. And that led to our first contacts with the Spanish government.
So I think this is a good moment in time to pause and have a little break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about everything that happened in Spain at the time, because of course you've just been talking about the fact that we were negotiating with the Pepe government, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves with a slightly more friendly negotiator. And I think that would be an adequate time to come back and start talking about that in part 2 of Viewpoint. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of Viewpoint. Tonight we're talking about a look back at the last 10 years. It's almost 10 years to the day that the UK voted to leave the European Union. And of course, Gibraltar went along with it. And now we're turning to a rather interesting time where Gibraltar starts getting closer politically to the actors in Spain than ever before, and perhaps for the first time negotiating directly with them. And a lot of this had to do with Pedro Sanchez. And I'm going to say this, I remember certain people within Number 6 having a conversation with them on a casual basis, and the general consensus was, there is a God. The Pepe government was out finally, and in came Pedro Sanchez, whom we started negotiating with.
Absolutely, and I think I'm going to go back to a point that Elliot made before about the proximity with governments both in the UK and in Spain, and I think that part of the success that we've had, and part of the success that Michael, the Chief Minister, and the Deputy Chief Minister have had, is in being able to secure those relationships. Because I think I disagree with. I think it's the only point so far that I disagree with what Elliot has said.
The night is young, my dear.
I think that our relationship with the UK government, with successive UK prime ministers, and indeed with the Prime Minister of Spain and the Foreign Secretary of Spain, is stronger than it ever has been at any point in our history. In fact, it's remarkable that a Prime Minister of Spain is recognising a Chief Minister of Gibraltar, that the Foreign Secretary of Spain is welcoming the Chief Minister of Gibraltar in his office in Madrid. These are remarkable things that 10 years ago nobody would have ever thought possible. The Foreign Secretary, the day after the referendum, on the 24th of June 2016, was saying that he'd see the Spanish flag over Gibraltar within 5 years, that it was the best opportunity that Spain has ever had. To go from that to a situation where a Gibraltarian Chief Minister is welcomed into the Foreign Office in Spain is remarkable. And it then goes to the further question that Elliot raised about what it means to be Gibraltarian, and I think this goes to what Michael was saying. I did an interview very shortly after the Brexit referendum about with a País where I said that I wasn't Spanish, I wasn't English, I was very conscious of the fact that I was Gibraltarian. And the circumstances that have surrounded Brexit, the negotiation, and everything, have made me very conscious of who I am, of what I am, of where I stand, and of the links with the EU and otherwise. In fact, the speech I gave in Parliament said that I am Gibraltarian, and I don't necessarily need the frontier to be there to feel any more Gibraltarian than I do. I don't feel any less Gibraltarian. I don't think that a French person feels any less French because of a frontier fence when it doesn't exist between France and Spain. So a French person knows he's French and a Spanish person knows he's French, despite there being no frontier in between them. So I think that actually the Brexit, the negotiations and everything has made Gibraltar and the Gibraltarians have to stop and think about where we are as a people and the direction of travel.
And I'd just like to add, I mean, Gemma's point, the political point, is the most important one, but also at officials' level. The level of knowledge and understanding at the Foreign Office and in vital departments of Gibraltar today is unheard of. I mean, that has never existed before. For 10 years, we've worked as a team, hand in glove, and enjoying what I would call a spectacular relationship with the Foreign Office and other vital departments. That is something we can't lose now. We've got to bank that knowledge and understanding that exists across vital and maintain it, because it has fostered friendships and relationships which are very precious. And equally with the Spanish government officials. I mean,
Would that have happened, though, I did pose the question, was Gibraltar lucky? In the sense that we've been dealing with the people who lent a friendly ear. But if, for example, Pedro Sanchez's election victories have been very close, and he's had to negotiate with other parties to be able to form government on a number of occasions. So could it all have been very different if circumstances had conspired otherwise?
But luck alone doesn't itself the treaty create. Yeah? So the individuals have to be there to take the circumstances and make the most of it. And I think that is the success of the negotiating team, that we've managed to take the circumstances and work with them to make sure that successive UK Prime Ministers know our Chief Minister by his first name, know our Deputy Chief Minister by her first name, know Michael, know the negotiating team. That is a huge success. And again, you know, the relationship with the government of Spain is also remarkable. So I do think that there is a lot to be said for that and for the strength of the relationships that currently exist.
Okay, I'm going to use this opportunity as a segue very quickly because you spoke about not just the political relationship, but also the official relationship. But before the referendum, we discovered through no other than a young 18-year-old Aaron Santos, who had an opportunity to speak to the then Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, that there was no plan for Gibraltar if they lost the referendum.
I remember him telling me well.
And it was actually me who interviewed you on that day. And we have that clip now that we are surprising you with.
God.
I asked a question on if there was a Brexit, would there be a contingency plan? Is there a contingency plan in place for Gibraltar and the UK? And he replied that there is no contingency plan, that they don't plan for an exit. And the real answer is that they don't know what an exit is going to be like. And therefore it is absolutely vital for Gibraltar to vote and the UK to vote to remain in the EU. Furthermore, on the topic of free movement, Mr. Hammond said that it's the Leave campaigners' #1 priority is to reduce free movement, and therefore that would have a huge economic effect on Gibraltar. So, thank you very much. That's about it.
Now
very cute. That.
Boom! Can open, worms everywhere. The Philip Hammond, the Foreign Secretary, says the UK government has no idea what they're going to do with
Well,
it.
and he was obviously telling the truth, because if one just has to look at how the last 10 years have unfolded in the UK to realise that it would have been much easier for them had we voted Remain. And, you know, and one thing I was very keen to say tonight is, on the 24th of June, when we all woke up to David Cameron resigning and political turmoil in the UK, if somebody would have told me, if Michael Yamas would have told me, in 10 years' time we'll have a treaty that demolishes the border between Gibraltar and Spain, I would have said it was impossible. So, you know, I think that we've got to stop and reflect on the achievements of what has been done in the circumstances that we found ourselves in. I mean, this is
that brings us very neatly to the core question that I really wanted to put to all of you, and I'm going to give you all an opportunity to answer it now. So, if Gibraltar knew in 2016 that this treaty would eventually emerge and that it did what it's doing right now, tearing that border down, would it still have voted Remain? Elliot, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, of course. It's our relationship with Europe, right? Yeah. Of course. I have no... My firm answer to that question is yes, I'd vote Remain. But I think just to talk broadly about the achievements that have been supported on this panel, whilst, of course, the relationship build with the United Kingdom has been there at official level, ministerial level, at chief minister level. You know, getting Gibraltar in front of these people is difficult enough as it is, actually, to be fair. I travel a lot to British overseas territories. None of them have the same exposure that Gibraltar has. None of them gets in front of them for a variety of different reasons. We do, because we are geographically in Europe. Secondly, we have a sovereignty claim against our name by the Spanish government and the Spanish people more broadly. But the reality of the situation is that Gibraltar needs to get in front of all of those other territories because we have an issue. And we did that religiously. The Chief Minister did it, the campaign did it, and members of the government did it. And they had to do it. There was no choice. It was an existential threat to our survival, and everyone put their shoulder to the wheel. And, you know, I'm not going to take anything away from that. That was the reality of our existence at the time, and that's what we did. But it wouldn't change my mind on how I'd vote.
It wouldn't change my mind either, but it's a very interesting question nonetheless. I mean, I've looked at all the papers going back to 1972 and the accession at the time and how little Gibraltar was consulted then. When I look at how this treaty has been done, how it's been negotiated, and how it is bespoke to the needs of Gibraltar, to the socio-economic model we have, it's a really interesting question to not to have voted in a different way, but do we end up with a paradox here that what we have now is perhaps, and we need to see how it's implemented
The proof
and
of the
how
pudding.
exactly, but it is certainly bespoke to the needs of Gibraltar, and that is really fantastic. So it's an interesting question. We lost services through Brexit, but we also realized during the heat map analysis that really the market that really mattered for services was the UK, and that became the first achievement of the post-Brexit negotiation to ensure the continued access to the UK market for financial services. And after that, what we needed was border fluidity and a Schengen-like relationship, which we never had as part of the EU. So in relation to the border and fluidity at the border, we end up with a much infinitely better situation than what we had with EU membership.
I think I made my views quite clear at the time of the referendum. I think everyone in Gibraltar knew exactly which way I was going to vote, and I made it abundantly clear what I thought was best at the time. I absolutely would not change my views. And I think that some of the achievements that we've had today, some of the achievements of the treaty, is because Gibraltar voted so overwhelmingly in favour of Remain. It was clear that the sentiment in Gibraltar was that the Gibraltarian people felt that they needed that fluidity at the frontier, that relationship with the EU, which we've achieved. And actually, what's that little step that's even more interesting is that we were at the Foreign Affairs Committee recently, and Stephen Doughty, the Minister for Europe, was being questioned by Emily Thornberry, and Emily Thornberry basically said, "Is it fair that Gibraltar now has a better relationship than we do?" And Stephen Doughty's answer was, it is as a result of a version of events which the British public determined. So would I have voted different? Absolutely not. Do I think that it contributed a little bit? Yes. But I think that the achievements of the past 10 years are quite remarkable. And yes, I do think that we are possibly in a slightly better position.
Okay, so let me rephrase the question. Would you embrace this treaty wholeheartedly, or if you had the opportunity, would you go back to a pre-2016 status quo?
I don't speak in hypotheticals, really. I think it's dangerous to speak in hypotheticals. But I think that there are elements in this treaty which are very beneficial, and there are things that, look, I think the government has accepted. There are things that we'd rather they weren't there. But if you think of the hand that Gibraltar was dealt on the 24th of June 2016, the hand that we were dealt was a very, very difficult hand. We had a lot stacked against us. So again, I think that where we are, given the train of events that we cannot change, is remarkable.
I don't mind speaking in hypotheticals. Let's go back.
You would go back.
Let's go back. Yeah, I think the position of the party that I'm a member of has been very clear about the treaty. The proof is in the pudding, in the eating. We'll wait and see. Yeah. There are obviously issues that we've had to swallow. We'll wait and see how they come out in the wash. But the reality is better in than out. And we've done what we can with this project. We've done what we can with this treaty. There are parts of it that some people in our community find offensive. But it is, as some people have said, the price that we have to pay. So I think we just have to see how we go and how this moves forward. But interesting times we live in.
I wanted to get Aaron's view on the pre-2016 status quo.
So I agree with the rest of the panel that, if we had the opportunity again, of course I would absolutely vote Remain for all the reasons we said at the time. But something that I want to mention is, if you look at the reasons the European Union was formed, for political cooperation, for peace with neighbours, for a shared market, for strength in the very changing world at the time, in a post-World War II world. Those were all the reasons the European Union was formed. My personal view is that the treaty that we have now, which, as Peter Caruana himself has said, is the best treaty we're going to get given the circumstances that we've been dealt with as a result. I think that the treaty delivers on a lot of those very reasons that the European Union was created. We've now got economic prosperity potentially in the years ahead. We've got political stability. We've got strength in a very changing world. And we've got a shared market now with the European Union insofar as goods. Of course, there are many things that we've lost, like Erasmus and services. But the UK voted to leave, and this is a democracy, and we just have to try and make the best of it.
Okay, so just as we're on the cusp of implementation and signature and ratification, things are happening in the UK. And of course, things are always happening in the UK. We haven't had a single prime minister that has served a full term in the last 5 attempts. It's a revolving door of prime ministers. But something else is happening as well. It's the British public is having opinions. And when that happens, we fear in our boots. But let's have a look at a poll that's been carried out recently by YouGov and what it tells us about the way that British public opinion is shifting on membership and a relationship with the European Union.
10 years after the Brexit referendum, a new YouGov poll suggests Britain's view of leaving the European Union has shifted sharply. Asked in hindsight whether Britain was wrong or right to leave, 57% of Britons now say it was wrong, compared with 30% who still say it was right. The divide remains stark among those who voted in 2016. 64% of Leave voters still believe Britain was right to leave, but among Remain voters, 89% say it was the wrong decision. The same poll found around 61% of Britons believe Brexit has been more of a failure than a success, with only 12% calling it a success. For Gibraltar, the question is not just a historical one. The ROC voted overwhelmingly to remain, but has since spent a decade negotiating a new place outside the EU. So, if the UK mood is now moving back towards Europe, what could that mean for Gibraltar, its treaty, and its future relationship with the continent?
I know this is a big headache and no one wants to talk about it, but that's precisely the reason why we're going to talk about it. What happens now if the UK wants to align itself closer to the EU once again? It recognizes that it made a really big mistake 10 years ago, and then all of a sudden wants closer ties with the EU and possibly even rejoin. What happens with Gibraltar?
I think those two scenarios give rise to very different considerations. One of them is what the UK government is doing at the moment, which is resetting and getting closer. That means further agreements like the negotiating an SPS agreement now on food and foodstuffs. If it's that sort of closer relationship with the EU, I think we're fine. And we keep our treaty, and the UK will have their own treaties on an ad hoc sectorial basis, perhaps, and we would continue with us and it wouldn't affect us. A very different animal would be the UK seeking to rejoin the EU. I mean, that would be a bit more complex. The starting position would be that that treaty would automatically apply to Gibraltar, because Article 3553 of the European Treaty, the one that says this treaty shall apply to the European territories for whose external relations a member state is Gibraltar, is still there. So it would apply. What I think would happen is we would try to negotiate in the same way as we had specific provisions for us in the 1972 Act of Accession. We would want to have specific provisions in such a future agreement, and those ideally would be the treaty. That's how I see it.
It's going to be that, God forbid that happens in a way, but actually, given the work that we'd have to do, I suspect the next 10 years of your life will be taken up by doing that. I suspect everyone's here. But just if you look at the statistics that you've offered, it's obvious why. You think about shrinkage of GDP of the UK's economy by 6 to 8%. I've got some other statistics here. Decreased investment by 13%. Increases in unemployment. It's been a disaster for the United Kingdom. The Chief Minister said, I think the other day, it's been the most immense self-harm that the UK has ever done to itself. So you can see why the general mood of the population has moved. But I agree with Michael. I think the position is the UK is currently, and Keir Starmer said it, may not continue to say it now, but in terms of the reset of the relationship the UK has with the Union. And as he's also said, that it is likely that ad hoc agreements will come through where the UK agrees certain items to assist in that resetting of the relationship. In that scenario, I agree. Nothing will change materially. We have our treaty once it's ratified, of course, by the UK and the EU Commission, then the Parliament. Then we're fine. But insofar as the other alternative, I dread to think what Michael's life will look like.
I think that, I mean, the results to a certain extent are quite galling, given that Remain lost the campaign, and we didn't think that a lot of the things that were being said at the time were true. It's actually come to pass that, in fact, they weren't true, what the Leave campaign was saying at the time. I have to agree with what Michael and I have said. I think that, if anything, there'd be an alignment. Alignment is more possible with ad hoc arrangements. At the moment, in the UK, as we've also said, you never know. At the moment, it doesn't seem likely that a full membership would be there. But, you know, we'll deal with that if it comes.
Stranger things have happened, haven't they?
Stranger things have indeed happened.
From my perspective, the way I see it, you know, being a political enthusiast as I am, and I studied international relations, so I love this stuff. From my perspective, what I think has happened is essentially the UK is catching up with Gibraltar. You know, the UK is wanting to get closer to the European Union. I can't see a situation in the near future where the UK will rejoin the European Union, but I do agree that they will definitely want to get closer to them. And you know, if that happens, great. It makes a lot of sense, and you know, our treaty will continue, hopefully, as it will be working. So, you know, perhaps it's a problem for a government in future generations, but for now, I don't see it as an immediate threat.
Okay, so we are where we are now. We've got a couple of minutes to go. Let's just go around the panel and have your thoughts about what you feel living in Gibraltar with the current arrangements that are coming in now, an open border, what that will look like. Let's start from the left and move to the right.
Yeah, look, I'm excited about the prospect of there being a different type of border, in fact, and I'm sure that many people are excited by it. I speak to a lot of people, as we all do, and there are mixed opinions about questions of security. My understanding from people I speak to that there are concerns about a lack of information, particularly in relation to borders and coastguards and customs, and I know that there have been town halls, and I don't want to get political about it, but there is a sense from people I speak to that they do not know what's going to happen on the 15th of July, and there's real concern about that right across the community. And I think it feeds into the one thing I would say about not only Brexit, but also potentially also the treaty negotiation. I think that the GSD were very, very clear, and Keith was very, very clear at the time, that if we had been elected in 2023, we would invite the then leader of the opposition, who would have been Fabian at the time, to negotiate with us as a team. And I think the people of our community are very, very clear when we face difficult times, and it's been done in the past, so we don't have to look for precedent too far away. But, you know, one of the regrets, I think, and it's often we're reflecting on the achievements, and, you know, Gemma's gone through a list of them, and she would. But it is also to look at where we could have done things better. And I think one of the things that we could have done better is actually, when this happened, we should have united leader of the opposition, chief minister, going into battle insofar as Brexit, but also in relation to treaty negotiations. We should have had, I'm not saying our best minds were not, I'm not saying that at all, but I think also, you know, leader of the opposition and other senior politicians in our community, I think people in Gibraltar expected a united front on that. And I think it is a matter of regret, and should be a matter of regret for all of us, that actually we didn't include others within that may have been assistance to our community. Okay, and I think that, for me, should be a matter of regret that we didn't do that. Now, I am not casting aspersions over the achievements at all, and it's not for me to do it. I'm on the executive. I'm merely a member of a political party. Okay. I'm not a member.
Well, we've got limited time, so maybe it's given you made a political point, and we want to make the other politician answer it.
Yeah, I thought we weren't going to make political points. I think that I'll go back to my original point, what the negotiating team have achieved is remarkable. The extent of their contacts has been remarkable. And I think it was incumbent on the government to negotiate a treaty. I think that the opposition have been brought in to discuss certain points at several points during the discussion, and I think that at the end of the negotiations, the leader of the opposition certainly was brought in for a briefing, as we have done several times. I think that the result that has been achieved is, again, remarkable, but I also think that more exciting than that, we now have a base from which Gibraltar can work. We now have a base of certainty. We now have a base from which we can invite investors knowing what the future looks like. We now have to seize that opportunity and make sure that opportunity is used as a platform for growing Gibraltar's economy, for growing Gibraltar, as indeed we have done in other key moments in our history. I think that the treaty, when you ask me what I think about the future, the treaty is a very, very exciting possibility. So I do agree with what Elliot's saying. There is a lot of nervousness in the community, particularly the business community, and that's why, alongside Michael, alongside Customs, we are having town hall after town hall in which we're not getting up until every single question is answered. We are trying to alleviate as many questions. We're trying to answer as many questions as the business community have. We've got FAQs, we've got everything. But once we get over the initial period, I think that the possibilities that the treaty offers to Gibraltar in 2026 and to the Gibraltarians in 2026 is hugely exciting. And the possibilities that we have as a jurisdiction is something which the treaty as a base has afforded us. And I say it at every possible opportunity. I think the business community will grow, the economy will grow as a result of the treaty. But for that, it needs that vision, it needs that clarity, and we need to know where it is that we want to go and where it is that we want to
move on to the final thoughts for Michael and Aaron.
My thoughts, Jonathan, is that this treaty represents a paradigm change to our lives, and it will. It is quite remarkable we are where we are today, considering where we were 10 years ago. There will be teething problems, no doubt, especially with traders, where they have to take on board the biggest number of changes. So that has to be worked out. It needs to be operationalized. It needs to work. There were some difficult parts of the treaty that were negotiated. We have to see how those work in the future. But by and large, I think we've got the basis for a complete transformation of our lives here in Gibraltar, for stability for the Gibraltar economy, for frontier workers who serve our economy to be able to come and go much more easily than they ever have, and it's a good position to be in.
Aaron?
From my perspective as a young person who campaigned tremendously to remain, and given the worries that I had at the time of a closed or a very hard border, I have to say I am extremely excited about the future. From a very human level, you know, we all have families or who may live on the other side of the border. We all love going to Spain, you know, and spending time there, and the stability that this will bring to our economy, and the potential for huge economic prosperity in the future as a result. Considering, as I said earlier, what the alternative was, you know, I think we have achieved the best possible result given the cards that we were dealt.
Right, well, thank you very much to our panelists. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure that there will be many more to come. Thank you all for watching. Good night.